I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our speaker tonight, Faye Blake. Faye was born in New Zealand and she offers an innovative mix of services. As well as being a counselling astrologer and a therapist, she's also a business consultant who offers original ways to use astrology in the working environment. She has a hands-on approach to vocational astrology, and that has made her very much a sought-after speaker at conferences internationally and various schools. And she has published a book, Vocational Astrology, which forms the basis of her tailor-made Vocational Apprenticeship programme. Faye is a passionate advocate of the Huber life clock method, and also for your using Ceres, who's now classified as a dwarf planet. Faye is the founder of the Amsterdam School of Astrology in the Netherlands. She holds an MA in Cultural Astronomy and Astrology, and her free monthly blog covers a wide range of topics. I'll be popping those in the chat any moment, but in the meantime, welcome, Faye, and over to you. Thank you
very much. I'll just share my screen and get going. Just get rid of things off my screen so I can see what I'm doing. Yeah. Right. So thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be here. I've had a bit of a cold, so I'll probably have to every now and then, but I hope it's not too disturbing. It's lovely to be here. This is one of my favourite topics, as you just said. Gillian, it's Ceres. I'm really a passionate. I've got Ceres next to Mercury, so I seem to be her spokesperson. So I'm all behind her and lobbying for Ceres. So that's partly what this is about tonight. Yeah, the other reason I wanted to really say why Ceres in the first place. I'll just go back so I can. So I can change my slide. Yeah. So why Ceres in the first place? When I was at Bath, which is the MA program, which is now in Lampeter, I wrote one of the papers I did was about Uranus and about how everything changed in 1781 when Uranus was discovered. And when I was writing that paper, Ceres was upgraded and Pluto was downgraded. So you probably remember that. And everybody went, "Oh no, Pluto is so a planet. We've got to still have Pluto as a planet. It's not fair." And there was all these T-shirts came out with about Pluto, but nobody said very much about Ceres. And for a long time, and still astrologers still put her with the asteroids. And I know there's some debate in the astronomical community about whether she's a planet or not. But she is, for a lot of astronomers, she's the same as Pluto. They're both dwarf planets. So I found that really interesting because I think when something changes like that in the universe, then it changes something about our consciousness as a whole. It raises the consciousness level or it changes it. So I found that very interesting. So since 2006, when I was still at Bath, I've been researching her ever since, and she's kind of caught my eye because she was a planet when she was discovered. She was in 1801. She's got actually virtually be interesting for you guys because she got virtually the same discovery chart as the UK chart because she's 1st of January 1801. So it's quite interesting, different time. But yeah, so it's interesting to think about her in that light. But that's sort of off topic. But anyway, that was why that was kind of why I got into Ceres, and I started thinking about, first of all, what happened. And she was a planet until about 1850, and in 1850, by 1850, there was all these other asteroids being discovered, and they were all like Juno and Pallas Athena, and they're all these women, all these pesky women, and probably somebody thought we can't have that many women planets, that's not going to work, so they were downgraded to asteroids. So, or whatever, if that's a downgrade, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, they were called asteroids from there on. But of course, in 2006, that changed. And it was only Ceres. That's why I only do Ceres and not the other asteroids. I mean, I find them all interesting. But Ceres is by far the biggest one in the asteroid belt. And there's two theories about the asteroid belt. One is that it was originally a planet and it was broken up, and the other theory is that it didn't quite come together as a planet. So, but for whatever reason, she's by far the biggest chunk in the asteroid belt, and all the others are not round. That's one of the descriptions for a planet. All the others are kind of potato shaped. They're all different kind of shapes. So Ceres is really different in that asteroid belt. But I also thought that where she is, sometimes we get meaning out of where a planet is in the cosmos, and she's of course between Jupiter. And the asteroid belt is between Mars and Jupiter. So I thought that was interesting. First of all, so my first sense of thinking about that was that Mars. Mars is the kind of the Mars symbol, and the little shoot that comes out of the ground, the Aries symbol, is that pushing through, that initiation, that first growth of a plant. The Aries symbol looks like a little plant coming up, and Jupiter, which is and Ceres is in between. Jupiter's about growth, right? So I think that made me think that actually that she's between the sort of the little sprout and the of a plant and growth. So what Ceres knows, one of the things she knows, I think, is about soil. She does soil. She knows about how things grow, how to get things to grow. So she kind of negotiates between the two, the little shoot that started and the growth. So she knows a lot about the earth and the soil. She's very earthy. So a lot of people put her with Cancer. I don't think she's Cancerian at all. I think she's definitely earthy, and whether she's got a planet or not, that's jury's still out on that. There's a lot of people think she has a planet. I think she's quite Saturnian, but she's not all love and light, but we'll talk about that in a minute. The other thing I thought was very interesting about where she is, and this is one of the things I'll touch on tonight as well, is that she's between, the Jupiter and Saturn are the social planets. So Jupiter is, the people who set the laws or the vision or, the kind of what we should be doing as a society, and then Saturn kind of regulates that, so make sure everybody drives on the left or the right or whatever. But so Ceres is between those two social planets and between the personal planets, between our will. Mars is our will. So I started thinking that between Mars and Jupiter, she is the one that's between the politicians and our will. So it's as if she's got a lot to do with democracy, I think, with how we give or how systems are governed. So she's a lot bigger than just the earth goddess and the earth mother, and a lot of people just give it to food and to eating disorders and things, but she's a lot wider than that. And in the mythology, in the past, she was a big goddess. She's the sister of Pluto and Jupiter and all the rest of them. She's one of those. So she was a really big goddess back in the day. And what I also loved about Ceres was that we had the moon, of course, in Western astrology. We've always had the moon, which was the mother, and we had Venus, which is the gorgeous young woman, and we didn't really have an older woman, wise woman archetype, and now we have. So I think Ceres is the older feminine wisdom. For me, she's the postmenopausal feminine wisdom. So Ceres and Pluto are both about rites of passage, which I'll come on to as well. But so we've now got the sort of trio of feminine planets, I think, in Western astrology. So that's the other reason I quite like putting her in there. And in 1801, well, I'll come on to some of her themes. But what I want to give you tonight really is just a way of thinking about antidotes, because what I've called this is she's an antidote for Pluto. So I want to give you an idea of just the kind of way of thinking about her and other planets as well, but particularly her. So that's where I'm coming from with her. But she is a really big archetype. So an antidote, I mean, you probably all know what an antidote is, but you think of it more about like a snake bite or something. When you have a snake bite, you need something to neutralize the effects of the poison. So that's what it actually means. And the other definitions is anything that works against an evil or unwanted condition. Well, that's a fairly old school definition, but something that compensates effects harmful to another. So that's the way of thinking about an antidote. So you can see where I'm going to go with this. But that's this kind of definition. But why Ceres and Pluto? Because what I think is they're the antidote of each other, the Ceres and Pluto. So Ceres is an antidote for Pluto and vice versa. So you're familiar, you will all be familiar probably, but I don't know whether you may not have thought about it before, but we have the sun and moon are kind of antidotes for each other as well. We have pairs, some of them have more than one, but the sun and moon, if we have a very sunny person or a very Leo-y type person, somebody who's always wanting the spotlight or, who's an over-the-top Leo, then what we sometimes need is a bit of moon, a bit of self-reflection, right, to balance it. So we're using the moon to balance an over enthusiastic sun, you could say, but it works the other way around as well. So the moon, if somebody's very moony and they're very taking care of everybody else and everybody else is more important, and we're looking after I've got a friend like this, she looks after absolutely everybody and not herself, then what you need is a bit more of your own heart, following your own heart, a bit more sun. So you come up for yourself and stick up for yourself and do things that are for you. So what about me? You need to look after number one sometimes. So you can see them as being in balance sometimes. And we can do this in our own chart. If we've got a too sunny problem, then we can look at the moon. So these are what I call antidotes, right? So I think that's probably clear. And Mars and Venus, obviously the same. So if we get somebody who's very Venusian, too Venusian, like too sweet, and where should we go to dinner? Or where would you like to go? Or are you having a cup of tea? Would you like a cup of tea? And then the other person says, no. Well, are you having one? That's a very, very kind of Venusian person. We need bit more Mars to say, well, I want this. Right. But if we've got, like now in the world, we've got too much Mars going on, we've got wars everywhere and people beating each other up and fighting and Donald Trump winning everything and, a very strong Mars, we need a bit more Venus to create a bit of peace. So they sometimes work together to get in balance. Okay, so you can see the kind of way they can work together. And you can use this personally, but on a world scale, mundane astrology as well. Then we've got Saturn and Uranus. Saturn can reign in Uranus if somebody's. We had that during Corona. We had very much the square going on between Saturn and Uranus, and we were trying to get that in balance, that square, I think. So we had people that were totally rebelling and not following any of the rules, and then we had all these really strong Saturnian lockdowns and you will do this and you'll not go to a restaurant and so we never really got the middle ground, I think, in that. But there was a sort of, when you invoke one, when you invoke too much Saturn, then you'll get Uranus as well. And if you get too much Uranus rebelliousness, then you will invoke Saturn. That's what's happened here. You probably all heard about the riots in Amsterdam a couple of weeks ago, with the Israeli football supporters. So that was very Uranian and very, in a way, very plutonic as well. But it immediately brought up sort of Saturn, people saying, no, that's not the narrative and we're going to get them, we're going to send them out of the country. So one invokes the other sometimes. But if we're conscious of it, then it works really well, I think. That can work really well to get them in balance. So I started thinking about Pluto, and I up till now, I don't think anybody can rein Pluto in very well. I mean, maybe Saturn can try. And maybe Uranus, but those two together are, maybe not the best things to have together either. But I think Ceres is the only one that can rein Pluto in. She's very she in the mythology she's not afraid of them. She takes them on. So I think they can work as a pair. So this is how I think that this is how they're linked. So we've got Pluto as their brother and sister. So Ceres is the sister and Pluto's the brother, obviously. Ceres is also the archetype of the mother-in-law because, and Pluto the son-in-law in this case, because of course Pluto abducts Persephone to the underworld and she becomes the queen of the underworld and she's Ceres' daughter. So Pluto is not only the brother of Ceres, but he's also her son-in-law. So the mother, if you've got a problem with your mother-in-law, you can look to Ceres in your horoscope to find out what's going on because she definitely reflects the mother-in-law in your horoscope, or the nanny, or the nurse, or I think she's not Cancer. Is the moon is the mother of a baby, and Ceres is the mother of a teenager. And the myth, it starts when Persephone's a teenager and ready to be. Ready to be sexually ripe, so to be taken to the underworld. So that's how they're linked as well. Then they both they think that both of them came from the Kuiper belt, It's an area in the cosmos, so they may be from a similar origin, but they're not quite sure. And as I said, as I touched on earlier, they're about rites of passage, both of them. So Ceres, Persephone needed Pluto to take her to the underworld for her to become a woman, probably. But of course, that's a Greek myth. So the Greeks are quite patriarchal. So that needed a man to be to be doing that. In the older myths, Persephone went herself to the underworld. She discovered being a woman and becoming fertile and all the rest of it. She discovered in the older myths herself. But in this one, it's however that works. It's still about the rite of passage of that, where Persephone is on the point of becoming a woman. And the rites of passage for Ceres, I think, is at the other end, where she's going menopausal and not able to have children anymore. So that's a rite of passage where she's going into her kind of cronehood, if you like, or in the older woman, wise woman archetype, which is, I find, quite interesting, because this is the first. Older women are really important now, I think, because this is the first time in history. This is Jean Houston. First time in history that women have lived long enough, and that they've got money, and that they're child free, and that they're educated. That's the first time that's ever happened. That women live a long time. They can live till 90, 100, whatever. So after they've gone through having children, the children have left home. Jean Houston says they need an assignment, so there's a lot of women in their 60s, 70s and 80s that are doing really interesting work now. And so it's interesting to think about that rite of passage into going into that age group, if you like. And they're both dwarf planets, so we mentioned that. So we're more familiar with Pluto. This is one of the T-shirts that came out, when Pluto was demoted, and everyone said, well, Pluto is so a planet. But we're more familiar with him as the god of the underworld. And but the problems we have with Pluto for us it was only discovered in 1930. So Pluto for us is a relatively new archetype or a new energy. We still, I don't think, in consciousness level, we still don't do Pluto very well. We've known up till the planets up till Saturn for a very long time, but Pluto is relatively new for us. And Uranus is, 1781. So I think the 60s we got more familiar with Uranus. How we could use Uranus. I think the kids today are much more Uranian. They're more comfortable with Uranus energy than we were, perhaps. And then, of course, we've got Neptune, which we're still not doing properly. We're still trying to solve Neptune problems with Saturn. We're trying to, I don't know, lock people up or give them drugs or labeling them, ADHD or whatever when it's a Neptune problem, when maybe we should be using other, I'll talk about that a little bit more. That's not an antidote, but you can also use like with like, but I'll come on to that maybe at the end. So as I said, with Pluto, it's a new energy for us. So we still have a lot of abuse of power. That's a plutonic problem. When we need an antidote is when there's rape or corruption or espionage or terrorism or sabotage or totalitarianism or propaganda. So you can see why I think you can see why I think we should need Ceres to do something about this, all of this, because we haven't done very well in not getting rid of totalitarianism, and particularly lately propaganda and all the rest of it. So these problems are pretty rife at the moment, I think, in the world. So I'm talking more on a social level than obviously private, but you can use them at any level. So we need an antidote for all of those things. We're less familiar with her. She's the goddess of the grain, of course, and she's not really a motherly mother. She feeds everybody, not just her children. So she's a more of a kind of making sure everybody's got grain. So she was the goddess of grain. And when she's positive, she takes a stand against Pluto, because in the mythology at one point, when she finds out what's happened to her daughter, she finds out that that Pluto has abducted her to the underworld, and then she doesn't know for a while, and she's in grief for a long time. But when she finds out, she gets really angry, and she understands that Jupiter, who's her brother and also Persephone's father, she finds out that he's given it the green light as well. He said, get over yourself, woman. It's a good match. She's right to be married. So, and he's a really good bloke. So, stop moaning. But she takes a stand against both of them. She says, I'm not having it at one point. So what she does in the myth is she negotiates, and she doesn't get everything she wants. She gets her daughter for only half of the time, or 6 months or 9 months, depending on which version of the myth you read. But she creates the seasons, so that's relevant for now as well. By the winters when Persephone's under the ground, and when she's above ground, then they work together and they're very happy, and they teach together. They teach cultivation. They teach about soil and how to grow things and agriculture. So a lot of people stop at the time when Persephone gets back up with her mother. But there's a lot that happens after that in the myth, which is, I think, really interesting, because it shows that Ceres comes out in her own right and does her own work in a way. So, but she negotiates, as I said. She's a very good negotiator, Ceres, and she accepts compromise. And I also think she supports underdogs like Me Too and the Black Lives Matter. So I'll show you some charts of that as well, where I think she stands up for people that are real underdogs. So that's a positive Ceres. That's where she is, just as a small picture, and it just gives you some size between Mars and Jupiter, just as a visual. So this is, if you're interested in Ceres, this is an interesting book. This is by Babette Stanley Spaeth. She's an academic, and she wrote about that. She writes every now and then about the Roman other goddesses, but she writes particularly this whole book about Ceres as the Roman goddess. And here she talks about that Ceres or Demeter, but the myths are slightly different, but they're very, very similar. But Ceres was associated with peace and social order. So she was, in Rome and Greece, she was a mediator between Rome and Greece. And she was the patron goddess of the plebs, of the plebeians. So that's why I say I think she comes up for underdogs, because she had her temple was a refuge and a grain distribution centre for the plebs. So it was a treasury and a record house. And she was associated with women of the imperial family, because that was supposed to be the kind of perfect woman. If you were a Ceres woman, you were a good woman. So she was associated, and there was pictures of her on coins and things like that. But that's why I think, because she looks after people without money, and makes sure everybody's okay and got a house and everything. And there's another slide about this as well, that I think she's associated with suffrage and democracy, because when she was first discovered, the suffragettes were getting going as well. I think she's definitely about women's lib. So this is a little bit more about Babette Stanley Spaeth. She describes, I thought this was interesting, because she describes the development of plebeian class consciousness through opposition to the patrician ruling cults of, among others, Jupiter. So Jupiter were the politicians, the Jupiterians were the people that ran the all of Rome, if you like. And Spaeth even hints that the temple of Ceres was not only responsible for care of grain supply, but also for public streets and buildings of Rome. So she's a kind of making sure that everybody's fed and housed. Is how I think she works. So you can see there's already, between Jupiter and her, there's a clash, because she doesn't want all the Jupiterian politicians to have all the best things and the other people to not. So she's a bit she's democratic in that sense as well. So if you think about Ceres as an antidote, then as I said, antidote was often used for things from outside, like snake bite. But it's something coming from the outside. But it's Ceres for Pluto, but also the other way around. So, for example, if Ceres gets out of hand, like Ceres can also be a devouring mother. Then you need a Pluto to stop her and saying, no, you're too much of you're hiding your daughter. You're hiding her light, and you're not letting her out in the world, and you're too controlling of your daughter. She needs Pluto to break through, Pluto energy to break through. So Persephone needs to fall in love, or have another relationship, so she can get away from her mother. So sometimes you need a plutonic experience to do that. So it can work both ways around. So, you know, the one's the antidote for the other. So I'm not suggesting that Pluto's all bad and Ceres all good. She absolutely isn't. And Pluto has good things to do as well, of course, because he's very transformational. So this can be used personally. So if you're getting overridden all the time, or if you're being bullied all the time, then what one sometimes helps is to have a look at how Ceres could help you in your own personal horoscope. And vice versa. So Ceres, if you've got a terrible mother-in-law, then you need to step into your own power as plutonic and say no to your mother-in-law. I'm not doing that, or whatever it happens to be. So I hope you're getting the idea of the way they work together. But the focus here that I want to show you some charts now. So the focus here is kind of more about social and global issues. Okay, so I thought this has actually been in the news again just recently, and I made this slide quite some time ago, but I thought it's kind of still relevant. You'll probably all remember this in the UK. If you're in the UK, the Grenfell Tower, which was in 2017, and there's still the last time in October 24. I'm just reading my notes here. The inquiry. The inquiry has already warned that about 250 people involved in the management, maintenance and refurbishment had faced criticism, and Scotland Yard has also said 58 people and 19 organisations are suspected of crimes. So it's been, and they even called it. There's a team of 180 police officers still investigating possible charges of manslaughter because of the way it was handled. So it raised a lot of issues, this particular thing. It was terribly sad. I mean, for those of you who don't know, there was how many, 70 people died because of the cladding that caught fire, and it went so quickly over the whole building that they couldn't get out, and it was handled really badly. But what's been in the news lately is all the other buildings that have this cladding that still haven't been fixed. So that I heard there was another item on the news this week about that. So let's have a look at the chart, because I thought it was really interesting to see where Ceres was in the chart. So this was the call. The call was at 54 minutes past midnight was when the fire brigade were called, I think, or when the first thing was mentioned. And you can see that it's sort of Mars and Cancer. The fire started actually in the kitchen. It was a fridge in a kitchen. So you can see that the Cancerian theme with the Mars is kind of relevant. But there was a lot of anger about the families not being housed. They weren't housed very well for a long time. Some of them are still in hotels, I think, even after, since 2017. But it started, and so there was a lot of anger after that. But what I found really interesting was, and remember that the sun was at 23 degrees, which I'll come back to on another thing. So just remember 23 degrees, but the sun and Ceres are right at the bottom of the chart, and Saturn is right on the top of the chart. So you've got problems high, and you've got Ceres trying to do something for the people below. So what I think this highlighted was that the authority figures, which you can take as the sun and Saturn, what came out is what I just read to you, that they weren't doing their job. So Ceres made it quite clear that the authority figures, they all talk, it was in Gemini, that they weren't doing what they should have been doing and taking responsibility for what was going on in the chart. She was right next to the sun. I think it drew what I've written here. I wrote a blog post on it, but I said it draws attention to fundamental issues in society, in particular the need for basic food and shelter to take centre stage. So you can see that's right across the MCIC axis. Saturn representing authority figures is opposing Ceres and the Sun. So Ceres are the plebs. So it's like the authority against the people, in a way. You can see there that they weren't being looked after properly. And Saturn's demanding some kind of responsibility. That's what happened afterwards. It was a big deal. So the Sun is helping. It's throwing a spotlight on the common people. Ceres next to the Sun. The Sun is highlighting that these people need some help. Demanding that those in power and local government take responsibility for the basic needs of the community. Remember, I said she was housing and grain. So, as I said before, heads have rolled and, manslaughter and all the rest of it. So yeah, so I thought it's quite a visual kind of representation, I think, of what was going on for the poor people that lived there and how many people died. It was terribly sad, the whole thing. And it's still, you know, as I say, it's still not over. Okay, I thought we'd have a quick look at Brexit. I know everybody's fed up with Brexit, but it's just come up again today. I was just reading again today, and I was just looking at where the transits are today. So I thought that was quite interesting. For Ceres, it's really interesting because I think it is the people's voice. You know, it is about. So if we look at the UK chart, and which is, as I said, also very, very close to Ceres chart, Ceres is at 23 degrees, right? So she's in Taurus in this chart, and she's square, just about exactly square Saturn in the UK chart. So I think Ceres also in a country chart also it kind of represents what kind of governing system you have. So you could say here that Ceres and Taurus is a very fixed kind of democracy. It's very Saturnian. It's very, you know, rules are rules. You know, we don't change. It's very fixed and old-fashioned and whatever. And but we also have Ceres picking up Neptune, opposite Neptune. So I always think that the UK Parliament is like a theatre, really. You know, it's not like play acting all the time. So, you know, it is a kind of theatre for the stage of democracy in a way. But there is a kind of, in the UK chart, there is a tenseness between the Sun and Ceres, between the people at 23 and the Sun at 10. That's a 1.5 squares. So sesquiquadrate, that aspect. So there is a kind of, you know, there's always been a kind of, you know, we the people and, you know, we're again the government and all that sort of thing. And the kind of the government that don't want to change things often, you know, that's kind of system. It's the system, you know. I remember when I first lived in the UK, I came across that. No, of course we shut at 2:00 the pubs. That's the system. It's always been like that, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, so that's the chart of the UK. And then this one is this is the Brexit vote. I think I've got that. Let me just see. Oh, this was when the polls closed. That's right. Yeah, on the Brexit vote. So what I found was really interesting is Ceres is at 24. So Ceres is making an aspect with Saturn, and so is Uranus. So Ceres and Uranus are together. So it's a shock. It was a huge shock to the democracy, you could say, or the ruling system, because it was square. It was trine the Saturn, but it also the Ceres also picked up the Mars. The Mars in the sky was opposite the 20. It was also at 23, opposite Ceres. So you've got the people. You know, that's the time of the polls close. The people are in Scorpio, very angry and trying to get revenge and trying to change the kind of governing system in a way. So it was. I think it was. You know, it was a massive shock, Brexit, certainly to David Cameron, but. I see he's been in the news recently too about you know, looking at how Brexit's worked out for him. But anyway, so that's it's interesting that that's all the 23s are being triggered, I think, in the UK chart. So that was the close of the polls, and then we've got this was when the this was, yeah, I was really waiting for this to happen. If you live in the UK, you remember that Theresa May resigned because she went to the election and then she lost even more seats. So this was the election that Boris Johnson won. But there was, before this, I was looking at it and there was a whole debate as to whether it was going to be on the Wednesday or the Thursday. And I thought, I bet it's going to be on the Thursday because Ceres is exactly on the sun. So, and it took place on the 12th of December, the vote, when Boris got in. And so you can see here again that the MC of that particular chart of the end of the polls as well is at 23 so that 23, you know, really reacts, that Ceres at 23 degrees of Saturn and Ceres really reacts to things in politics, I think. And the Ceres is, yeah, it was interesting that the people wanted to have their say. That's how I interpret the Ceres on the sun. The people really wanted to have their say about the power that government had. You know, so you could say they want to have their own power in a way. So this was when the UK left the EU. So Ceres, so this is a whole new start. This was the chart for 11 o'clock. Of course, in Europe it was midnight when they left, but for the UK it was 11 o'clock. And so we get a slightly different MCIC for Brussels. But what I found interesting is Ceres would just change sign. She was at 0 Aquarius. So it's like it's like we're going with our own, freedom. We've got away from the EU. It's freedom. We can do our own. We can have our own, way of governing, and we don't have to be anywhere in the EU anymore. And hooray, So there's a big change in the way it's governed. They thought they were going to have a lot more freedom. But of course, you've got Pluto at 23 as well of Capricorn in this stage, totally at the bottom of the chart for the UK. Total transformation with Brexit. So it was a huge rumblings of Pluto picking up the Ceres, and huge rumblings that really changed the whole landscape for the UK. It was a massive deal. What I thought we'd look at today, though, was this is today. This was just done any old time today, I think. What we've had going on now, what we've got going on now is Uranus has been going across. It'll come back again onto Ceres. It's in Taurus, of course, Uranus in the sky, and it's going back again onto Ceres. So it will do that at what date? Let me just look at the dates of that. I've got the dates down somewhere. I thought. I think it was the May, I think it was. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, it was the 20th of May was when it first went across Ceres, the Uranus. So Uranus was on Ceres. So I was having a look today to see what was going on in May. And what came out in the headline was that post-Brexit border checks had cost 4.7 billion so far to try and get the Brexit going. And the other thing, what was going on, that Northern Ireland was in the spotlight again for Brexit. So there's kind of the agreement that was trying to be made around about May was Northern Ireland has come up again recently too about how it's really going to work. So they still haven't got the whole leaving thing sorted. So it's still going on and it's still unstable, still quite unstable. And Gibraltar is still a problem as well. So, and just recently, David Cameron, in the May time, David Cameron, when he was still foreign minister, he'd said he was really worried about the EU's border system, leading to long delays. So it's still not settled, and you can see that it's not going to be, I think, until the last hit of that is February next year. So the 21st of February. So it'll be interesting watching the 21st of February. So that was just to give you an idea of why I think that the people speak, and that Ceres also represents governing systems, and to try and, stop the power that Parliament has sometimes. Okay, I thought I'd show you just a couple of people against people. So that was like countries. This one is, I don't know if you remember this if you're in the UK, but these are a few people that are kind of antidotes for each other, I think. So this is Barnier, and this was really interesting because I don't know if you know who Michel Barnier is. He was the EU negotiator, but he's just lost a vote of no confidence. He's the shortest prime minister in France ever. He just lost the vote yesterday or today. So he's the shortest prime minister ever in France, which was for 3 months. He was 3 months. He was prime minister, and he was voted out in a vote of confidence. So I thought I'd leave him in as well because I looked at him a long time ago with Boris. But he's interesting in the sense that this has come up again today. So this is what Barnier said about Boris. He said EU Brexit negotiators had to act as the adults in the room in the face of repeated provocations from Boris, which at times became pathetic and almost childish. This is what Barnier had said. And in his 500-page account, he's written a book as well about this. And in 4.5 years of talks of the Brexit negotiations, he accused Mr Johnson and his inner circle of political piracy and states boldly as negotiations reach their endgame, I simply no longer trust them. So I think you can hear quite a lot of Pluto going on there as well. So let's have a look at those two together. This is Barnier, and we do have a time for him. So he again has 23 degrees, Ceres at 23 degrees. So he's interesting because he was the negotiator too. So he's taking the negotiator role, and he's got Sun Ceres conjunct. So he was that negotiator role in trine with the Ceres of the UK. So I mean, he was probably a really good person to do the negotiation. But he really didn't. This is today. Sorry, this was the 19th. I don't know, I thought I had Boris somewhere, but yeah, I might have. This is the 19th of November this year, and this is when this is looking at Michel Barnier. He said on the 19th, he said, I don't know if you've been following the vote of no confidence, but he said on the 19th that he'd use one of the, it's Article 49.3 apparently, but which says you're allowed to override government, you can just push through. It's a bit like having president, like in the US, they have presidents can push through sometimes and he said he would probably have to push through his authority measures on this day, on the 19th, and that was when Ceres was on Ceres. So I think the people have spoken, they didn't want the austerity Capricorn Ceres measures. So he's now no longer Prime Minister. So it's the shortest in history. And what's interesting today is that Ceres is at 29 of Capricorn. So it goes and it'll meet Pluto in a minute, which I'll talk about that cycle in a minute. Okay, so I think you can see that it's got something to do with governing systems. I hope you can anyway. But that if power gets out of hand, like it has done when Barnier pushed something through, then Ceres says, no, we're not having it. Like she did in the myth, I'm not having it. This is, I don't know if you remember this, I love this story. There was, when this was a while ago as well, but it's a really good example of how people can be antidotes for each other, I think. This was Lady Brenda Hale. I don't know if you remember, and it was that Boris tried to prorogue Parliament. He tried to shut down Parliament and then push through what he wanted. And Brenda Hale was the head of the Supreme Court. And it was a lovely story. They had and she really went for Boris. She said, no, you can't prorogue Parliament. They decided the Supreme Court. And I don't know if you remember, if you saw her on TV, she came out all dressed in black and she had this wonderful spider brooch when she announced the judgment. She was really plutonically dressed with, that was the spider. All the internet went mad and all got spider brooches after that. But she really didn't like Boris, and she really went for him, and said he can't prorogue Parliament. But what was interesting is that this is the inner wheel is Boris and the outer wheel is, I haven't got a time for her, but her planets are obviously right except for the moon. So her Ceres, her I'm not having it kind of thing is on Boris's moon. So Boris has the moon in Scorpio. So he said, well, I can do whatever I like. I need to do this. I need to take my power. And Lady Hale said, no, you're not doing that. Ceres said, no, you're not doing that. And also Ceres he's got Ceres at 0 degrees and his moon is between Ceres and Uranus, Boris's. Can you see that on here? So his moon is at the midpoint of Uranus here and Ceres. So Uranus is a bit wide, but his way of governing is I can do whatever I like. I need to do whatever I like. If you take Ceres as his governing way, and his moon and Pluto, moon and Scorpio says he can do whatever, and Uranus says I don't care. So here's Lady Hale saying no, you can't do that. So I thought that was quite an interesting use of Ceres from her. So she was like. Here's another one. You remember her? She was. This was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who died just at the wrong moment, so that Trump could add Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. Do you remember her? She was really popular. She was on the Supreme Court, but she died just at the end of Trump's presidency. Trump has got Pluto opposite Ceres, so that says something about his way of governing as well. He just he just says, well, I've got the power and I'll do it. But you can see that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has got Saturn on his Ceres and opposite Pluto, so she's not really a fan of Trump either. She really tries to rein Trump in, and she also has Ceres at 10, picking up Pluto at 10 of Trump. So she's on the outside, Donald Trump's on the inside. So they're in a quincunx. So you can see that she doesn't want him to have power, really. So she's trying to mitigate what's going on with the Supreme Court and what's going on for women's rights and all the rest of it, because Donald Trump, the Pluto opposite Ceres says a lot about how Donald Trump treats the environment and how Donald Trump treats women, I think. But anyway, that's by the by. But this is what Ruth Bader Ginsburg said about Trump. She said, I can't imagine what the country would be with Donald Trump as our president. For the country, it could be 4 years. For the court, it could be, I don't even want to think about that. So this is something that she was on the Supreme Court when she said that this is totally out of, the Supreme Court never make political statements. And referring to something she thought her late husband, Martin Ginsburg, would have said, she said, now's the time for us to move to New Zealand. He's a faker. He has no consistency. And he says whatever comes into his head at the moment. So for a Supreme Court judge to say something about somebody, that carries a lot of weight. And she never apologised. She said later she probably shouldn't have said it, but she never said, sorry, I shouldn't have said it. She said it was probably better if I didn't, but she never withdrew it. So that gives you an idea of how people can, come up against, how Pluto and Ceres can come up against each other. So she was really trying to mitigate, I think, Trump's power as well. But of course, she died, just which made it really difficult. She did it. She went into Pluto territory just before, so Trump could get his way, which was a bit of a, depending on your point of view of Brett Kavanaugh, a bit of a problem. But yeah, this was the last one of these. These are women against men often, but because Trump's such a perfect example. Jacinda was the the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And she also took Trump on. She wasn't having any of it. She wasn't scared of him. So these women just stand up to power in a way, right? Because Trump was president of the state. And she said, I was waiting to walk out to be introduced at the East Asia Summit Gala dinner when we all paraded, and while we were waiting, Trump in jest patted the person next to him on the shoulder, pointing to me and said, this lady caused a lot of upset in her country, talking about the election. And Jacinda said, well, only maybe 40%. Then he said it again, and I said, no one marched when I was elected. So she wasn't scared of him, right? She marched against him actually in the women's hats, in the women's march, remember, with the pink pussy hats, when they marched against Trump. So what the Ceres archetype is also the grandmother archetype, I think, and you've got at the end of the myth the young woman Persephone and Ceres work together. So that march was grandmothers and young women against Trump. So that was interesting that he's got that in his chart. So this is Jacinda. She's got Ceres and Gemini right on his sun. So she can say it very sweetly. So she's got Venus right on his sun as well in Gemini. So she made a joke of it, but she still kind of put him down in a way, because with her Ceres, she said, I'm not having you say that, but she said it as a joke. So I thought that was quite interesting. So that's Trump again with Jacinda. That's probably enough of them. Right, let's have a quick look at underdogs. You all remember the George Floyd thing. This was I've left this one, and I did this chart, and I wrote about this on my blog quite some time ago. But I found it such an amazing chart that I've left it in for tonight. So you remember George Floyd? He was the one that was killed by the policeman. He kneeled on his neck for quite a long time. He was arrested and then he died. And there was a big my things have gone slightly haywire, but still. You get the gist. So this is the US Sibley chart, which I think responds quite well. And the US Sibley chart has Ceres at 8 of Pisces, and it's in a square with Uranus, nearly exact. It's Uranus Pisces, Uranus and Gemini, sorry, with a square to Ceres and Pisces. So we've got Ceres here in the Sibley chart, 8 Pisces, and Uranus here, so it's a square. So that also says something about the ruling system, I think, in the USA. So freedom, the Declaration of Independence is very Uranian. Their way of running the country is supposedly very Uranian. Freedom for everybody and we the people. But what I found fascinating was with George Floyd was that Ceres, because this started Black Lives Matter, it came up again. There was a big Black Lives Matter already existed, but it was again, it sort of reignited it. And you've got Ceres on Ceres of the US chart on the day that he died, and you've got the sun fairly near at 5 degrees, fairly near Uranus as well. So you've got Ceres at 8 square Uranus. You've got the sun on that picking up that aspect. And the picking up that whole square is a sun Ceres in the sky. So it's triggered that whole it's not fair. You need to live the Constitution and you need to live the we the people. So it's very interesting. And of course, it was all during the Pluto return for the US as well. But I thought this was such an amazing, it was so amazing that Mars was also there. The anger was that Mars was also at 8 of Pisces. So it was, the anger that came up in the Black Lives Matter, it reignited. So again, we've got this going against the power. That the people don't want the power of the police. You get an antidote. Ceres trying to be an antidote, I think, saying we don't want this. We're going to revolt. Right. So that was that. But the last thing I want to cover, and we've got, that's good. You've got about the right amount of time. One of the things on a new subject, one of the things that I really wanted to talk about as well, because it was the the Pluto-Ceres cycle, because obviously when they meet, things happen. So everybody knew about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, when COVID hit, and it was about, I think the first death was announced the day before or the day after this particular conjunction, I think. I mean, we know now that there was COVID before that, but in the January we started the first death of the guy in China was announced that he'd died of COVID. So that was when it started coming out. So everybody, all the astrologers knew about the Saturn-Pluto cycle. But what is absolutely fascinating, of course, is that Ceres was right in the middle of that. She's also at 22 degrees of Capricorn. I don't know if any of you knew that. So this was not only the start of a Saturn-Pluto cycle, it was the start of a Saturn series as well, which I don't want to look at because these two are antidotes. I think it's interesting to look at the Pluto-Ceres cycle. Okay, so we all remember COVID and what happened. I really love that. I love that one that was doing the rounds on the internet. I mean, it was mad, wasn't it? All these people buying toilet paper and things. When you look back now, you think, what the hell were we doing? But it's interesting because this was looking at the cycle. It's quite a short cycle, so it's about every 5 years. So the January, the 2020, the January of 2020 was the start of this particular Ceres Pluto cycle. And the end of it is in a few days' time. It's the 9th, I think, of December. So the next cycle, and it's at 0 of Aquarius, right? So it's a very different kind of cycle. So we're about to start a new cycle of Ceres with Pluto, which is why I thought it was interesting to talk about it tonight. So the actual, what I looked at when I was following this, because I was following Ceres and I knew that it was a Pluto-Ceres start with COVID. So I was following it with COVID, but of course it's also in other things as well, but I looked at it in respect of COVID. So I was following it. So the first square was in April 2021 and the opposition was in 22. Closing square was last year. And as I said, the new cycle starts at 0 of Aquarius and I think it's the 9th. I've got the chart of it in a minute. So this was actually this was just a little bit later. This is the actual exact Pluto Ceres start. So it was actually the 13th. It was a day later when it was the actual conjunction was exact. But you can see that the sun was also there as well. So it's not just a pure Ceres Pluto cycle start because it's got the sun there and it's got Saturn there and it's got Mercury there as well. So it's quite a pile up. But I still think you can, of course, it's flavored by Saturn, but I still think, and the Saturn Uranus, of course, that we had in the middle of COVID, but you can extract that one, you can look at that cycle independently, which is really interesting, just the Pluto series. So that's what I did. So what I did was I looked at the first square. So let me have a look. The opening square, just grab the notes here. The opening square was in April, 30th of April 2021. And by that stage, we'd learned quite a bit about Corona and there was a lot going on about power and control, how we were going to deal with COVID. And it was really tricky. I mean, I think people really didn't know what was going on, but it was obvious that Pluto is about sort of control and Ceres is about environment. So we're going to get some kind of control to environments, both inside and outside our body. So we're starting to hear about vaccines. We're starting to hear about lab leaks or not, or Wuhan, or we're starting to get the kind of a bit more information about COVID at this stage. And what most governments did, and this is from my blog post as well, and of course it was understandable at the time, was control our environments by stopping us going places and meeting people. So you can see that the Pluto was overpowering what our freedom and what we were allowed to do. So that was a lot about taking control and being in power. Interestingly, around this date, Trump announced that the virus had come from Wuhan. I don't know if you remember that, but there was, and everybody said, no, that's a conspiracy theory. No, it's come from a bat or whatever it came from. But he around this time said, no, it's from Wuhan. You never know what Trump, whether he's right or not, but half the time it turns out that he's telling the truth, but you never know with him. This has been vehemently denied, but when I was writing, it was surfacing again. So it could definitely manifest as keeping some kind of natural process under control. I think Ceres and Pluto could manifest that way. But by this time, vaccines were being rolled out, and there were some reports of black vaccines causing blood clots. I don't know if you remember one of them was taken off the market. I think it was I can't remember which one it was now, but it was taken off the market because it was dangerous. It was the one that was developed in the UK, I think, was taken off the market. It was just after. So it was nature fighting, you could say, because Ceres likes natural things. She doesn't like things being messed about with. I don't think she'd like vaccines. She was all for baking bread and having vitamin D and having fresh air. And, they knew that fresh air helped with things like this. It was sort of through manipulation of nature, you could say, that the vaccine, they were trying to do something with the vaccine. And of course, I understand that that's what they were trying to do, and trying to get a vaccine was obviously because running scared. But I think the virus wasn't going to go away. I was writing at the time. And so how might that work to get an imbalance? Because it was very plutonic. The whole strategy for COVID was very plutonic. Everything else that was said to be natural was said to be not okay. So then you get the opposition, and then you had a lot of the mandates were started to be lifting, because we knew at this stage that some of the jabs were causing pericarditis. There was a few people having heart problems and things. So there was a bit of information coming out about vaccinations, but there was a lot of push to get everybody vaccinated. They were dropping the age group in several countries down to getting babies vaccinated. And there was also they didn't really know what to do. But by this stage, we had the Delta variant, which wasn't really killing as many people, but they were still pushing hard on the narrative of you need to be vaccinated and you need to stay or whatever. So in the Netherlands, there was doctors fined after this for giving off off-label medicines to COVID, and the people were getting better. That was what Trump was going on about at one time as well. But let's just look at the rest of them. So the third one was what was going on with the if you followed COVID. This was when there was a lot of information coming up in alternative media about excess deaths and what was going on with excess deaths. That's usually you have I don't know if you followed this, but usually you have a number of deaths per year, the sort of expected number of deaths per year that people die. And then they expected to have a lot of deaths because of COVID in the 2020 and 21, and they did. So they put that down to the COVID, although the registration of people died of other things sometimes, but the registration was they died of COVID, even when they might have just had COVID and died of something else. But anyway, there was that going on. But it kept going up. So they knew by 2023 that the excess deaths in 23 were still going up. They were usually, when you get some kind of pandemic, you get the deaths, you get a high death, and then because a lot of people have died, you get a lower death in the next year, and that hasn't happened. And in fact, the death rate is still going up. And so at this stage, there was calls for research to find out why that was happening. but nobody did anything about it. But they suspect it was to do with the way COVID had been handled, not only the vaccine but also lockdowns and like in I think it was there was I'll talk about that in a minute, but so there was a lot of questions being asked now when you got that third square about what was really going on, and did we need so much lockdowns, and was there fraud going on with it? Here there was a big case with people buying the masks, that they were making heaps of money, and then there was the thing with Ursula von der Leyen where she deleted all her emails and ordered millions of vaccine, and was that fraud? So there was a lot of underhand things going on, and we knew that some of the narrative wasn't quite right, and there was a lot of censorship and propaganda going on. So now it's the 8th of December is the last one. So I thought it was the 9th. So this is the one that we've got coming up in a few days' time. The 8th of December is the conjunction. And what I found really interesting is just yesterday or in the last week, that I don't know if any of you have seen it, there's the report came out from the House of Representatives, the House in the US came out, and they've done I think a 2 or 3 year study of COVID and how it was handled, and it's really damning. They said the Wuhan thing wasn't a conspiracy theory. It's highly likely. There was no scientific evidence for using masks. There was no scientific evidence for social distancing. That a lot of people lied. There was a lot of fraud. There was a lot of money stolen from taxpayers. It's quite damning, and it's a cross-party paper. It's a 500-page paper. If you're interested in that, it's the truth has been written down about what happened, and about the control that went on that probably shouldn't have. So I think what's happening now that they're coming together is the people are starting to speak, or people who didn't have a voice during COVID. There was a lot of virologists that were saying we should do this a different way. We should not be locking up, everybody. We should be protecting older people, or, doing it a different way. We shouldn't be giving vaccines to children or whatever. They were not heard at all. So what's coming out now is that that those two are in the clinch again, Ceres and Pluto. If that makes sense. So it's quite interesting, and it's a whole new cycle because it's a whole different sign. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. It's a bit revolutionary, I think, with it being with Pluto and Uranus. Pluto in Aquarius is pretty revolutionary anyway, but with Ceres, it's like the women have to stand up and say we're not having it again, or somebody has to do that. It's not just women, but the wise feminine archetype is going to box with the powers that be. So it's interesting as governments are falling all over the place at the moment. A lot of governments are really in trouble. So it's interesting. A lot of people are saying, well, democracy's dead. We don't have any, in the EU, we don't have any say anymore. So that's something for you to think about, I hope. So anyway, that's my last slide. So just to kind of I hope I rest my case on antidotes. So I hope you can see that they could be used to balance each other. So that's an antidote for me, is using a different planet to heal. So using the moon for the sun, or the sun for the moon, Ceres for Pluto, Pluto for Ceres. But I also, it's a whole other talk, is what I call astrology. It's like homeopathy with planets. So it's using the same planet to heal. So like cures like, but as I say, that's another story. So that's it. So there we are. That's my book. I've got 4 recorded lectures on Ceres from the LSA, which you can buy through the London School of Astrology. Had an article. It's on one of my websites, which I'll go in a minute, about Ceres, in the March and April of 2022. I've got lots on my blog. If you search on my website, fayeblake.nl, there's loads of stuff on Ceres, and some of this, what I've told you tonight, is on there on my blog. I do a free blog post every month. And on my astrology.nl website, I've got quite a few articles and bits and pieces that you can look up if you're an astrologer, to read some of the things. So, and that's how you can get hold of me if you want to. So there you are. So that's me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Faye. That was absolutely fascinating.